Good morning. So today I'm going to talk about tearing down your documentation that doesn't work, documentation for legacy products, documentation that's unorganized, doesn't have a brand identity, just bad docs. And so you can talk about preparing and reorganize so you have good, valid, organized, brand strategized docs, all anybody ever wants. And once it's torn down, everything will be magical and wonderful. So before I do that, though, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and how I know what I know. So hi, I'm Alexandra White, and I just got to Prague a couple of days ago from my home in New York City. And I've officially been a technical writer for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was a web developer at a television station where people had been there for 5, 10, and 15 years. So there was a lot of legacy of knowing where the code was, how it worked. It was really hard to get started and to find anything. I had to constantly ask our engineers questions, and it wasn't an efficient use of time. So I became an advocate for commenting in our code, having actually useful readmes, etc., and that's what led me to my job at Joyent. And when I started at Joyent, I barely knew what the cloud industry was. I had heard some of the buzzwords, I had attended a single conference, and I was expected all of a sudden to help all these people use our products when I didn't know what our products were. So I had to jump, get the ground running twice as fast. And until 8 months ago, I was the sole full-time documentation editor, though I still am the sole full-time documentation editor who works on cloud. And our work was created by engineers, by the support team, by the product managers, and they did the best they could. Before me, there was no technical writer. And honestly, though, it was a huge mess. There were thousands of documents, they were really unorganized, they hadn't been verified, and I tried to put out as many fires as possible. And I caught up as fast as I could and tried to address a really big hole we had. We had no introductory documentation, so that was my first battle to face. And as soon as I got comfortable enough and felt like, oh, I think I actually understand how our products works, I requested to do my favorite thing, burn it all down. So today I'm going to talk to you about how I did that, how I proposed to burn it all down and start over. And then I'm going to talk about what it took to take it into action, writing a content strategy and a style guide, including a little twist of what happens when circumstances don't go your way and things are put to a halt. And then I'll talk about some of the things that I missed in my proposal so that when you write yours, you're ready to go and you're all experts. But the first things first, I did a content audit when I started in August of 2016, and I was horrified to learn we had 9 different websites that had documentation on them, some of which I did not even know about until a year into my tenure. And there was zero strategy for actually how to write docs. So you had to have either significant effort in looking for information, or you had to have intimate knowledge of the very weird way these many sites worked. There was a lot of technical debt created by having documents that were just posted to the internet and forgotten about and left to die. But you'll hear a lot more about technical debt tomorrow from my fellow speaker, Louise Fahy, so I'm excited to hear what she has to say about that. So first I'm going to highlight some of the many websites that Joyent had documentation on. But before that, the wiki, or oh goodness, I skipped a, yeah, okay. When I was confused on how to find documentation, I often used Google search. That's a problem. I crossed my fingers and I hoped that the information that I found would be correct. But it's a bad solution because a lot of our websites were password protected. So there was hidden information that I did not have access to. And don't get me wrong, I love Google. I think it's a great way for people who are beginning to get started on any new technology, but even our internal engineers were using Google search to find information, and that's a really big problem. So here's where I highlight some of the websites that Joyent uses for documentation, starting with a wiki, which was maintained by our operations team and our support team. And this was probably the most up-to-date of all of the documentation websites, but password protected, and to find information, it was like a support team trade secret. and was not sure how to find anything unless you were on the support team. Next, if you work in tech, you're probably familiar with Jira. There were lots of bugs that were reported, and the engineering team and support team would take the time to solve and answer how to resolve these bugs and document it, but the information was lost and stuck in these tickets. It never made it onto public documentation websites. Then there were our API websites, and these were single-sourced from our code. So this is great. This is what I want. I want my docs to be as close to the code as possible. Unfortunately, in practice, our code was being updated and the docs that were alongside them were not. Then there was our blog. And you might think, blog, that's mostly marketing content, but there were a lot of really in-depth technical tutorials, integrations, and conceptual overviews that were far better than anything on our actual documentation website, which, this is it, our public documentation website. It was supposed to be the main place where people went to get support and understand how our cloud worked. But unfortunately, it was only maintained by the product team, not the engineers. Some of our engineers did not know that this website existed, despite the fact, again, it was our public documentation website. So this is horrifying. There was no lifecycle plan. Once documentation went up, okay, it's fine. Everything is fine now. We don't need to think about it again. That's a problem. All of our docs were written by different voices, the voices of our support team, the voices of our engineers, and our product team. And everybody had different opinions as to how we should publish our docs. There were no users tests to see actually what users liked and how they could find information. But all messes can be fixed, all problems can be addressed. Our job is to help our users find their answers and understand the minutiae of our products. Our job is also to help our colleagues write better docs. After all, we cannot be the experts on everything. That's impossible. That's why we have subject matter experts, so that we can get as much knowledge from them as possible and help our users know just what they need to know. And we're shepherds. We help guide users to the answers they need and our colleagues to the answers that they need. But now you've made so much investment into your docs, people might say, it's really risky, I don't want to get rid of everything, it works fine, people have gotten along, it might seem really risky to go ahead and blow everything up. But it's really important to understand the purpose of a good argument. As a kid, I understood the value of a good argument. My brother and I desperately wanted a dog, and my father thought that would be too much of a burden. We can't have one, it would be a mess, he would be responsible for everything. So we did what any 10-year-old and 8-year-old do. We wrote a proposal of the reasons that we should have a dog. We would walk the dog, we would arrange a time and schedule for feeding, we would babysit to raise money to pay for vet care, because you can definitely pay for vet care with babysitting money. And the process of this proposal writing really helped us further believe we deserved this dog, we were responsible adult children. And it worked. That's our pug, Maggie. And there were a number of problems with Joyent's documentation, and an argument was half of the battle to getting my manager to believe that this was necessary. We needed to make a change. If you can't convince your manager that change is necessary, then there's nothing you're going to be able to do to fix your docs. The best kind of argument is a proposal. So your proposal's audience is your manager, it's stakeholders, it's not you. It's essentially a marketing document to prove why it's important to tear down your docs. Here's how I'm going to solve all the problems, how I'm going to meet our company's goals. Everything will be better if you just let me do this. And the process of writing your proposal will really help you understand what the problems with your docs actually are. You can understand if it's missing content, if it's unstructured, if you need better brand identity, etc. And there were a number of Joyent problems, as you saw with our 9 documentation websites. And at the time I made this proposal, I was still a team of 1. But that meant I didn't have the luxury to just plan and try and make things better. I also still had to answer tickets and fix user problems. There was no time to just stop everything else. But my proposal convinced my manager that it was worth taking time to actually fix the greater strategy problems. My proposal will act as a case study as the ways to get your managers to say yes. And all great proposals start with an introduction. And you might be wondering, why am I actually starting here? Why does this matter? But if you can't hook people right away and prove why this is valuable, why this matters, they're not going to pay attention, and it doesn't matter how convincing you think your argument is. Someone might not read the 2, 5, or 10-page document as to the intimate reasons why each piece of document can be updated and how you can fix it. You have to spell out why there's a problem and convince them right away at the beginning. For Joyent, I tried to convince them that we were supposed to have a documentation overhaul a long time ago, that it was long overdue, that our documentation had gotten out of control, and to back it up, I tried to talk about our company goals. We wanted to be the #1 cloud provider in the industry, because that's totally possible. We can be anything we want to be. But we didn't want to be a niche cloud provider that people who were just industry nerds knew about. That meant we had to have better docs, because if you can't use our product, no one's going to come. It doesn't matter how good your product actually is. So think about what your company goals are. This is the time to say, this is how I'm going to fix our docs, and our company is going to benefit because of it. But before you actually can write new docs, you need to understand what the situation is with your docs, performing a content audit. So I've already talked about the 9 websites, as seen earlier. I listed all of them and talked about what content management system was used, who was the intended audience, and who was writing the docs, because it was different for every single website. And I made recommendations of what websites we should keep, which websites we should migrate content from, and which should just go away forever. And the #1 focus of all of our problems as technical writers and as people who work at a company is our audience, because everything is done for other people. We're not doing this for ourselves. And if you're fortunate enough to have a marketing team that has personas, definitely refer to them. I was not so fortunate, so I divided my audience into 4 goal-oriented categories. First, there were business owners. These are people who needed to understand what our product was, how to use getting started material, see, can I get this up and running fast? Next, investigators. These are engineers who have probably already used your product and have some experience, but they're looking for the more advanced features. How can I do better? Problem solvers. These are people who come to your docs in a panic. I have something that is broken and wrong, and I need to fix it right now. I don't have time to read all of this fluff surrounding it. I need solutions. And then finally, detectives. Detectives are product managers or engineers who are wondering, is something possible with your product? Can I use a certain type of feature that I might be able to use somewhere else? And with your goal-oriented audience, it's good to set actual goals. And for us, #1, too many websites. How do we organize and find out what actually is good content, what's worth saving, and what do we need to throw away? Next, how do we set up cohesive templates so that people know what type of documentation they're reading? Is it an overview of materials? Is it an FAQ? Is it a step-by-step tutorial? They should know right away, so we set their expectations that we're going to help them provide the information that they need. Then we also needed internal goals. It was really important to me that our engineers and anybody who would submit a request for documentation had a clear way of doing so, so that I knew how to proceed. And that meant creating guidelines for how to submit a request for new documentation. By setting up these questions, I was able to avoid some of the back and forth of, what's this new feature? What do you mean that you need new docs? Tell me more, please. And finally, a clear process for document deprecation. What do you do when a document is long out of date and should not be live anymore? And that's where a life cycle plan comes into play. You should be thinking about every step in between creation to deletion. And for Joyent, that meant from the generation of an idea, we should have a doc for that, to writing that document, to publishing it online, to updating it every time there was a change to the feature or to the code, to archiving it if it was no longer useful, to deleting bad docs. Every single step had a set of protocols to follow. You might add warnings to content or add redirects, because if you take documentation away, you don't want your users to just end up on a 404 wondering, well, am I going to get any help? And we had a long task list of things that we needed to accomplish. That started with really defining, again, what the project scope was. We sort of have already done this in the proposal, but fleshing out more personas, who we were creating the content for, writing a content strategy, site architecture, etc. And the task list serves for really breaking down, here's the amount of time that I need to spend doing each step of the process, because it's not just you snap your fingers and you have new, better docs. There are a bunch of additional sections that I'm not going to go over. A schedule, you should say, this is when I plan on delivering these things. Here's the tools I need to be successful. The cost, that's the amount of time it will take and the amount of money. So if you need to buy tools, what does that actually cost? And any additional considerations, like, should our documentation be open source? If so, how are we going to do that? So suffice to say, whether it's a very long and important proposal about tearing down your documentation, or short and sweet and to the point, like Alexandra and Philip should have a dog and this is why, what matters is that you make a clear argument for why you need to tear down your docs and how it's going to make everything better. Okay, so you've written this proposal, your manager says, that's awesome, here's all the time and money in the world, because that's absolutely how it works. Now what do? Planning was half the battle. You have already made so many steps, you already have so much information, and planning is really great. It helps inform future product changes. This work that you've already done is going to be reusable too, if you ever need to write another proposal, and parts of it can be used in your content strategy. Content strategies are where you put all of the pieces together. It's where you think about the natural next steps of where does my work go from here and how do we make it sound like it's from the same people. I actually spent 6 years ago, I was a digital marketing manager, and there's a lot of ways that marketing content and technical content are different. Marketing content, I'm trying to sell you something. Technical content, I want you to learn something. But there's a lot that as technical writers we can learn from marketers. Content strategy helps create consistency, and users should see the same language, feel like they're on the same website. It should all be cohesive and go together. A singular brand strategy. It's a good opportunity too to coordinate with your marketing department. Here's an example of our public documentation site, our sidebar in 2016 and our sidebar in 2018. And to be fair, the product names changed a few times since I started, so there was going to be natural changes. But at the bottom of the 2016 sidebar, there was a section called Joint Cloud Images. And this was left over from many previous iterations of the product name. It used to be called Joint Public Cloud. It's now called Triton. And that wasn't very consistent. It was important to rebrand that so you knew what the cloud images were for. But that's it. There's also a company culture problem. We still call it Joint Public Cloud internally, and it's been years at this point. People still call it JPC. That is in our code. It's legacy that you can't get rid of. Company culture is really hard to change around naming, but at least on the outside, it can look like it's all the same. And it's really good to articulate rules for controlled vocabulary, making sure that everybody is using the same brand names and that we're using the names of other brands in the correct ways. By pre-establishing these writing conventions, along with voice and tone, grammar, text style, UI rules, and accessibility rules, all of which are very important, you can help set up the way all of your writing is going to sound. And if you do this prior to writing new docs, you've already helped inform yourself, and you've helped inform any engineers or anyone else who writes first drafts of documentation for you. Definitely encourage people to use the style guide. And a key piece of the strategy is to actually delete things, because if documentation is bad, or really outdated or incorrect, we don't want it living out there in the universe. I sent out a message to people who maintained docs that were over 2 years old and said, if you don't tell me that this is still necessary, I'm going to get rid of it. Granted, I didn't actually delete anything, and I don't necessarily advise you actually delete things. I just took it offline and put it in an archive, just in case. But by saying, hey, I'm going to delete it, it really got people's attention to maybe make some updates. But here's where things get interesting. So Joyent is a subsidiary of Samsung, and that means our highest stakeholders are in Korea. They have different ways that they learn, different ways that they think about things, and after 2 years working on this product and working on these documentation changes, I was asked to work on something totally brand new, to drop the reorganization, not to complete it, and to move on to a product that did not yet exist. So, confession, almost all of the websites I mentioned at the beginning of the talk still exist. And the PR where I was reorganizing our public doc site to be so beautiful and task-oriented and great is languishing. But hopefully I'll be able to get back to it soon, or they'll hire another technical writer who can take over and make everything better. So remember, nothing is precious. Don't hold on to material and think of it as the end-all be-all. Take what you learn from the process of writing new docs, because there's still valuable information to be gained, even if the actual docs that you rewrite are not published. But despite having to stop, I still learned some very valuable lessons from this process, and I realized that there was key information that I missed as a part of this process. First, user testing. I really wanted this to be important, but I wasn't given the time or the budget to buy software or to talk to actual users. I was told not to really do that and that we would just move forward and make it better our way. Don't do that. Budget for user testing. It's really important because your users are using your website. Don't you want them to be able to know how to use it? And also, this was a really good opportunity to engage with my colleagues because, remember, they were also using Google search to find information. And if I wanted them to stop doing that, I had to help them create the answers they were looking for in a cohesive way. It's also to remember to have empathy for your engineers and for your colleagues, because documentation will not be their first priority. It's your first priority, but they have other things they have to do. They have to push code, they have to publish other strategy, they have to do a variety of other things for their managers to meet their managers' expectations. So if we can facilitate them and help them write better docs by providing them templates, the style guide, some hands-on training to talk them through and encourage them that they are writers, because fun fact, everybody is a writer. If you're writing tweets or writing emails or writing documentation, you're a writer. So encouraging them that they can do it too, and remembering that when they have other priorities, to still be nice to them. More difficult than all of that, though, is having a company culture of documentation, because it doesn't matter if you say 1,000,000 times, this is really important, our product really needs it, if your managers don't believe it's important, if other engineers don't believe it's important. So remember that docs are everybody's job, and empower them to help you do your job better. That means that your products will be better. And it's crucial to understand the thought patterns of the people who are reading your documentation. At Joyent, that meant thinking about Samsung. How were they learning? What did they expect from us and from our documentation? All documentation is affected by culture, so diversity matters. Having people of diverse backgrounds will help you think about different ways of learning so that your docs can be more inclusive. This slide is blank on purpose. We're almost at the end. Everyone take a breath. But before we actually end, I want to remind you what we talked about today. We talked about how to write an awesome proposal that your manager will totally support you in for tearing down the documentation. Yay. We talked about the first steps for taking a proposal into action, and how it's also okay if you're not able to 100% complete the job because some other variables get in the way. And I talked about the things that I missed in this process so that you do better in your docs. And if you remember nothing else, remember the following takeaways. So first, having a plan is the only way you're going to succeed. Planning is the #1 thing that everyone should be doing, documentarians, engineers, etc. It makes your work better. By making informed decisions, your documentation will be consistent and coherent. Be okay with throwing out your work by pushing it aside, and remember that it's okay to go through the process of learning, because every time you do something, you get better at it, and you can do better in the future. And remember that your work is important, and you are important. Docs are hard. They are not easy. And sometimes it's good to be remembered that whether or not docs are highly valuable, you are helping to explain critical, complicated concepts in a really simple and easy way. You matter, and your work matters. And remember that you're surrounded by people who do work just like that. So if you're struggling with something, ask us. We all want to help. And remember to be a shepherd, to help guide your users and your colleagues to the answers that they need. Thank you.